I'm going to paint this cat, starting with the eye, with a permanent yellow, which is a Holbein color. And I'm going to add a little permanent rose on the bottom here. That's a Winsor and Newton color. And I'm also going to put a little permanent rose in some parts. So the forehead, a little bit of the inner ear, parts near the ear, and a little bit of this part of the fur where the sun is shining. And I'm working on Fabriano Extra White Artistico rough paper, which is a paper I like Fabriano, but I'm not crazy about their rough paper. It's too, each color is, see the ridges are just too symmetrical. It doesn't seem that natural, and they're deep, but I have some of it. I want to give it more of a chance. I'm going to start working with some complementary colors. So I'm laying down some ultramarine blue, which I am going to complement with some light red, also called by some English red. I've seen it used in a lot of tutorials by English artists in places where some might instead use burnt sienna. In fact, I think it's a very similar color to burnt sienna. In the photo I'm copying from, the cat is black. I don't know what's going to happen to this cat. We'll see what color he wants to be. I didn't feel like starting right away with black. It's easy enough to turn something black in watercolor later, because black is a dark color and you can always make something black. There's always time for that. But sometimes you can give the suggestion of black without really going 100% black. Not to mention that many watercolor artists frown on the use of black. It's seen as a form of cheating. I'm adding water to the paper just for fun, to let the colors mix as complementary colors like to do and gray each other out. Unfortunately, I'm allergic to cats, but I appreciate both their independent personality and their beautiful appearance. I'm going to let this dry because I like what the color is doing. Animals often come to life once you paint their eyes, and especially their pupil. So that's what I'm doing. And as you can see, this dried a lot lighter and very colorful though. So I'm glad that the color is still there. I'm adding a little pink where I see pink in the photo. And there's a little bit of pink here and a little bit of pink here. I don't know if I'm going to keep that, but I'm starting with that. And now, since it is a black cat, even though I turned it quite colorful, I'm going to use Payne's Gray for the top layer. A little bit of purple here because I don't want it to be quite that pink. So again, I have a little bit of very diluted Rose of Ultramarine, but I'm going to go back with Payne's Gray, which is going to take over pretty much, because it's quite watery. So as you can see, it's flowing, I would say nicely. I like for color to flow. If you don't like color to flow, watercolor is not your ideal medium. I'm lifting a little bit here and a little bit here. And then I'll keep going with this Payne's Gray. The idea of keeping it fluid is that you'll be able to see some of the colors. Payne's Gray can be, even though it's dark, it can be made fairly transparent. And when you work so small and it's winter and there's a heat on, the layers will dry pretty fast. As you can see here, it's already dry. Here it's already dry. That could be good or bad. If you want your paint to flow, then you gotta be careful, because if you don't want dry marks, you gotta work either very fast or very watery or both. This is the tail. That I want to keep slightly separate. Not completely, but just enough that can be identified. The pupil I need to make a little darker. And then I want a little bit of a surface for this cat to sit on. I'm using some burnt umber that I had out, to which I'll add a little bit of that permanent rose I have used, and a little bit of that cobalt blue, just to suggest some of the colors that are already in the cat's fur. I'm gonna let this dry before deciding whether it needs something else. Whiskers probably, but it needs to be fully dry for that. So my little cat is practically done, but I have 2 more steps that will require some drying. And the first one is, now I'm going to lift a little bit of color where the sun is and darken around it. Still with some Payne's gray. So I'm lifting here, but I don't want that lifted section to stick out too much, so that's why I'm using a lot of water. And I want this bottom part to be dark, so that the whiskers that I'm going to put in the next step, if all goes well, will pop even more thanks to the darkness. And right now, this is not Payne's gray, this is a mixture of all the colors I've used. So it's a more interesting dark, also a little bit less transparent because there is cobalt blue, which is not that transparent. So I'm using here just a lot of water. And again, without really defining this cat that much, I'm just giving some variety to the body by darkening the shady part and lifting a tiny bit the areas where the light might fall. And maybe I'm going to add a little bit of permanent rose where the light is here too. And darken a little bit this too with that same burnt umber and a little bit of permanent rose and a little bit of cobalt blue. This is just water, which I'm happy for it to leave some marks. Now I need a lot of patience to let this dry completely before I'm going to try my luck and paint those whiskers with probably I'm going to use gouache, white gouache. I'm pretty pleased with my little cat, and there's just a couple of things I have to do with white gouache, and one is to put a little highlight on his eye. Normally that's nice, more nicely done by leaving the wet of the paper, but with such a small painting, such a small eye, that's hard. The last thing to do here is the whiskers. I'm using gouache, white gouache, and being very careful because I've ruined many a painting at this stage. I think I'm gonna stop here before I make a mess. I'm rather pleased with this little guy, and I hope you like it too.